Hey everyone. This video is going to be largely based on how to create your own competitive Pokemon Pocket deck. However, it's going to be more useful for many of you to just know how to find a good tried and tested deck. So I'm actually going to start quickly with how to do that and then get into how you could be making your own deck if that's more your style. You want to start off with this really helpful website, play.limitlesstcg.com. It's going to take you here, and you're going to select Pokemon Pocket, and it's going to take you to this tournaments page here. And what I want you to do is find a completed tournament on this tab here with a lot of players. So, you want something in the multiple of hundreds. This one looks good. It's got 245 players, right? And so we are just going to click into that tournament. And right here, you will see the winner. And they were playing Hydreigon and Mega Absol EX. And so you can just click this button right here, List, and it'll show you every card in their deck. You can even open it as an image here. And look, it will show you which 20 cards they had in their deck. This is a really strong deck currently, and I would highly recommend playing it if you're just looking for something to get started with. You can also, if you go back, any of these decks look cool to you, you can just pull up those lists and you can begin playing with a list that did really well in a pretty big tournament recently. As easy as that. If you're like me and have more fun making your own decks, or maybe you have a cool idea that isn't getting a lot of play right now, and so you're not sure how to build it, this next section of the video is for you. Pokemon Pocket is unique because it only allows you to have 20 cards in your deck. And this means that every single card you put into your deck is going to be highly impactful, because you are pretty likely to see most cards you have in your deck at some point in the game, especially because you start the game with 5 cards in your hand. And this can feel like a lot of pressure when making your deck, because one bad card can be the difference between a highly competitive deck and a deck that can't compete with the top decks in the meta. But I'm going to show you how to relieve some of that pressure by filling in a lot of the cards every good deck is going to need, and showing you where you can make some decisions about how you want the deck to play. It's important to note that I'm recording this on February 16th, 2026. So some of the specific cards I show might change as new cards are released. However, the premise and the general idea of this video should last for quite a while. So, we start with 20 cards that we need to add to our deck. And now let's add in some freebies. Every single competitive deck ever since the start of this game has had 2 copies of Professor's Research. At this point in time, the card is still a non-negotiable. You're just always going to have 2. Now, the next most common card in decks is Pokeballs. Most decks are going to run 2 Pokeballs. Now, some decks that run multiple basic Pokemon with 50 HP or less might run Lycia instead or in combination with Pokeball. However, this is more niche, and you typically only have 2 cards between Pokeball or Lycia. So it might be 1 Pokeball, 1 Lycia. Might be most commonly it's 2 Pokeball. Sometimes it's 2 Lycia, 0 Pokeball. You get the idea. But you're going to have 2, maximum of 3 of these cards that are going to search out basic Pokemon for you. So I'm just going to put Pokeball here, but remember, it could be Lycia depending on what deck you're building. So just like that, we have 4 cards out of our 20 that we can put in with little to no thought or effort at all. The next part should be pretty straightforward as well, assuming you know what kind of deck you want to make, and that is we're going to add in your Pokemon. Looking at the top decks in the game right now and from recent tournaments, they have between 4 and 10 Pokemon in them. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to take the average and say 7. But remember, it's really plus or minus 3 from that 7, between 4 and 10. So that deck I showed you how to find at the very start of the video, that Hydreigon deck, had 7 Pokemon in it, so I'll just use it as an example. It had 2 Dinos, 2 Hydreigons, it had 1 Mega Absol and 1 Leapover Absol, and it had a Nihilego as well. So these were the 7 Pokemon that were included, and with that, we're up to 11 cards. Again, remember plus or minus 3, so we're really somewhere between 8 and 14 cards. So just about halfway through making your deck already, and we haven't had to do hardly any decision making at all at this point. Now that we have all the Pokemon in our deck, there may be some trainer cards that are required to play with your Pokemon. The most common example of that is going to be Rare Candy. And so whenever you're playing a stage 2 Pokemon like Hydreigon, you're going to want 2 Rare Candy almost without fail. And it's basically a requirement for the deck, so we can throw those in. Another example of required trainer cards for Pokemon, I'm going to show you a different deck list here, a Mega Kangaskhan deck list that just did really well in a big tournament. Mega Kangaskhan, you're almost always going to see it run with Serena and Ilima. Serena is basically going to fill in for a second copy of Mega Kangaskhan. And Ilima is going to help you pull back your Mega Kangaskhan if it gets too weakened. Those are basically requirements for any Mega Kangaskhan deck, so you're going to have those that would fit right into this category. Another example of a common required trainer card would be Poison Barb when you are running a Nihilego. It's going to increase the amount of ways you can get poison on your board. And this deck is running Nihilego, so I'm going to slip in some Poison Barbs here. There are also Pokemon-specific supporter cards, like, for example, Gladion, which helps you with Type Null and Savali decks. Things like that that are specific to your Pokemon in your deck. So if your deck has a supporter or something that goes specifically to that card, like Rare Candy, Poison Barb, Gladion, any of those things we've discussed, this is where you add those. Typically, decks will have between 0 and 4 of these type of cards. So again, if we're just taking the average there, that is 2. And so my deck here has 4 of them because I'm including Rare Candy and Poison Barb. But on average, we'd be at 13 out of 20 cards in your deck filled in, again, without really making many decisions. So far, we've basically just talked about cards that are required for your deck. We've got Professor's Research, we've got searching out basic Pokemon, we've got the Pokemon you want in your deck, and any required cards to play with those Pokemon. So there hasn't really been a whole lot of decision making, but that's going to change. I'm going to ease you into some of the early decisions here. The next thing I'm going to talk about is an incredibly important type of card in your deck, but it's not strictly required. It's just very powerful. And that is cards that allow you to access your opponent's bench or to control their board a little bit. And so there are 3 main cards that do that. There's Repel, there is Sabrina, and there is Cyrus. Now, these cards can massively disrupt your opponent's board at the start of the game, especially cards like Repel and Sabrina that can just buy you an extra turn if you need it, or if they don't have many cards on their board, you can essentially just force up a card you want and have a chance to KO it early. And so Sabrina, Repel are so strong in the early game, either aggressively or sometimes to buy you that extra turn. And Cyrus, on the other hand, is the strongest finisher in the game. It allows you to pull back up a Pokemon that they thought they had safely retreated, or that you've been able to ping with something like a Greninja, and force it into the active spot to get those final points you need to win. These cards are extremely powerful and impactful cards, but are not as strictly required as the cards we've talked about so far. Most decks, the standard is running 1 copy of Cyrus and 1 copy of Sabrina, and that will change depending on exactly what deck you're running. For example, if you're running something like Greninja, which can ping your opponent's bench at ease, you probably don't want the Sabrina. You'd probably rather have that second Cyrus, so you might run 2 Cyrus and 0 Sabrina in that deck. If, for example, you are running a deck that has just too many supporter cards, maybe you drop the Sabrina for a Repel, which is an item card. There are pros and cons to all of these cards, but many decks include 2 of them. 2 copies, whether it's Cyrus, Sabrina, Repel, or a mix of those 3. However, like I said, this is where we're starting to make some decisions. On average, decks at this point will have about 13 cards in them. My decks are a little bloated with 15 because I had to include Rare Candy and Poison Barb. So I think I'm going to make my first cut here, and I'm just going to include Cyrus, and I'm not going to have a Sabrina. We'll see later on if I end up having room for a Sabrina. It would be a great card to have, but to get myself back on track a little bit, I am going to cut the Sabrina and just run one Cyrus as my finisher. So now, on average, you should have about 15 cards in your deck with only 5 more spots to go. I'm just slightly above average still at 16 here. The next category of cards we're going to be talking about is a similar priority level to Sabrina and Cyrus, meaning it's not mandated like Professor's Research or your Pokemon, but it is exceptionally powerful, and the top decks usually include about 2 copies of this. And that is additional draw support. You're going to have some draw support here from the start of your deck, but beyond that, this additional draw support can come in a number of forms. And the reason it's so powerful is it does 2 things. One, it makes your deck more consistent. There's a higher percentage of games when you have additional draw support where your deck is able to do what you want it to do. And the second is it makes your deck more explosive. You are able to, on average, get doing what your deck is supposed to be doing at an earlier turn. And those both just lead to a higher win percentage. The most powerful and the card you should almost always be using for additional draw support is Copycat. This card lets you shuffle your hand into your deck, and then draw as many cards as your opponent has. And this is really the first card in the game for draw support that rivals Professor's Research, and there are times where it's just flatly better than Professor's Research. And let me give you a couple examples of how that might work. One is you only have 1 card in your hand, whereas your opponent has like 4. If you play Copycat, you're going to net 3 additional cards. You're going to go from 1 card to 4 cards. If you played Professor's Research, you would only net 2 additional cards. And so it's better in those scenarios. But perhaps the most overlooked spot where this is better is the cards in your hand that you can't play are probably not the cards you need in that scenario. And so if I've got 3 cards in my hand and my opponent has 4, and I can't play these 3 cards, they're not a whole lot of use to me. But by getting 4 new cards, I am getting to see 4 new cards from my deck. I've got 4 chances at something that might be what I need. Whereas Professor's Research, I would keep my original hand, and I would draw, into 5 cards instead of 4, but only 2 of those cards are new. And so it may actually be better to play Copycat in those type of scenarios as well when you're looking for 1 card in particular. All that to say, Copycat is extremely powerful. If I'm even discussing it along the power level of Professor's Research, you know it's a good card. This is going to be by far the most popular option for additional draw power. And again, most decks include about 2 cards for additional draw power, but there are other good options. Next is May. May allows you to take 2 random Pokemon from your deck and then put it into your hand, and then return 2 Pokemon from your hand to your deck. And so this lets you get specific as to what Pokemon you're looking for. If your deck runs a lot of Pokemon, in particular like evolutionary lines, May might be more powerful for you than Copycat in some instances. It's also a good inclusion on decks that include a lot of natural card draw. So Entei and Charizard decks usually include May instead of Copycat. That's because Entei is drawing you cards every turn, and so your hand size is going to be very big, meaning Copycat is not going to be as valuable. But May, on the other hand, would be very valuable there. So May is one other card you can include here for additional draw power. Another option is Sightseer. Sightseer is extremely niche, and I would be really careful about adding Sightseer to your deck. What it does is you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and you add any Stage 1 Pokemon you find in those top 4 cards to your hand. I think the magic number is about 5 Stage 1 cards in your deck. If you don't have 5 Stage 1 cards in your deck, you probably shouldn't be running Sightseer. Copycat's just going to be better otherwise. Where the Sightseer can be helpful is things like evolution decks, where you're running, 5 total evolution cards. Sightseer can be a slight advantage there, but I would be cautious, and a lot of the time, Copycat's just going to be better anyways. The final one is one we talked about earlier, and that's Lycia. Now, this would have to be in addition to or supplanting the 2 cards we talked about at the start of the deck. If you are running 4 Pokemon with 50 HP or less, or more than 4, I would consider running 2 Lycia and 1 Pokeball. And so that could be one way you have an extra card here for extra draw support. So, like I said, most of the top decks are running 2. Some of them, however, have to make a cut and only run 1 additional card for draw power. That means they're going to be a little less consistent, a little less explosive, but they've got space for 1 more card here. Hydreigon, though, the deck I'm building here, really needs that extra consistency because I have to find a Dino, I have to find a rare candy, and then the Hydreigon to get into my big hitter. So I am absolutely including 2 Copycats here. They are 2 of the most important cards in this deck. And so I remain just above average. On average, you should have 17 cards in your deck right now. I'm at 18, and that's okay. And we are going to talk about the final spots of your deck next. The final few cards of your deck are the hardest part of your deck to build. Most of this is pretty straightforward. We've got the required cards, we've got your Pokemon, any cards your Pokemon require, some board disruption, some additional draw support. This is all fairly straightforward with only a couple decisions to be made. On average, you should have about 17 cards at this point. I have 18. And so those remaining 3, or for my case, 2 cards, are what we call flex cards. They could be a number of different things, and this is so hard to decide because there are so many things I would like to include in a deck. I'm going to go over some of the most common categories of what might be a flex card and some of those options for each category. The first category is hand disruption. So how can I mess with my opponent's hand? The first option is red card here, which puts your entire opponent's hand into their deck and draws them 3 new cards. This is really nice because it's an item card, meaning you can play it alongside a different supporter in a turn. And if your opponent's hand is getting really out of control large, especially if you're playing something that draws a lot of cards like an Entei or like a Suicune, red card can massively set them back. The other very similar card is Mars here. And so it's a supporter card, and it shuffles your opponent's hand into their deck, and they draw cards equal to the number of points they need left to win. And so this can be devastating. If your opponent has 2 points already, so they only need 1 point to win, and you play a Mars, you're setting their hand down to 1 card. This can just absolutely deny your opponent their win condition. It also can be played like a red card early in the game to reset a big hand down to 3, although you're getting slightly less value that way because it's just your supporter for the turn. So those are really great options that should be considered. One trick to think about here is I would prefer Mars over red card in decks where I am running an EX Pokemon. In other words, decks where it's fairly likely that late in the game my opponent will have 2 points. They'll have knocked out one of my EXs. Then I can hit them with a Mars, setting them down to 1 card. It's a lot more complicated if you're only playing single point Pokemon like in this deck. So Mars might not be the perfect card in a Hydreigon deck, and red card may be a better inclusion there. The next category would be damage modifying cards. So these include red, which is a supporter card that just does a 20 extra damage to EX cards. And for this category and the next category, it's where it's going to be really important to know the meta. Know what cards are really common right now. For example, as of today, February 16th, 2026, the 3 most popular decks in the game are Hydreigon, Mega Altaria, and Suicune and Greninja. Those decks are running around everywhere, especially those first 2. Red would allow you to hit Mega Altaria for 20 more damage and Suicune for 20 more damage. So you need to ask yourself, is that going to be helpful? Mega Altaria has 190 health, so do you have something that's hitting for like 170 or 180 damage? If so, red would be perfect because it's going to allow you to one-shot those Mega Altarias. Or do you have something that's hitting for like 110, 120, something like that? That's going to knock you over a 140 hit point Suicune EX? Red could be really good there if you struggle with that matchup. So it's really, really important to know the most common cards in the meta for these damage modifying cards. There's also Giovanni, which just does 10 extra damage to any card. So if you have a Pokemon that hits for 140 and you're trying to take out a Hydreigon, Giovanni might be an important card for you. Those are the supporters that modify your damage. Then there is also Poison Barb right here, a tool card that is adding poison whenever your Pokemon gets hit. So let's say I am fighting that Suicune and I'm only able to do 130 damage with my Hydreigon. So Suicune still has 10 health left. But if I play a Poison Barb on my Hydreigon, now Suicune can't hit my Hydreigon without knocking itself out to Poison Barb. It'll take 10 damage at the end of their turn and then 10 damage at the end of my turn, and keeps adding up as long as they're in the active spot. Or more, if I've got the Nihilego, that damage becomes doubled. Another very similar option is Rocky Helmet, which just does 20 damage whenever your Pokemon gets hit. So that would work much the same in this scenario here, where the Suicune hits me and knocks itself out to a Rocky Helmet after it takes 130 damage from my attack. So those are other ways to modify your damage. Then there's ways to increase your survivability. And so the most popular one is Giant Cape. It just is an item card or tool card that gives you 20 extra hit points. So again, important to know what's in the meta, right? We've got Hydreigon, which swings for 130. We've got Mega Altaria, which can swing for 130. And we've got Suicune, which swings for 120. So if your Pokemon has 120 or 130 health, adding some extra health is going to make a huge difference there, because you don't want to just get knocked out by all the big cards in the meta. You want to be able to live a hit, and so Giant Cape, depending on your Pokemon, might be essential there. Another way to increase your survivability is by healing. And the most common ways you can do that are Lily, right here, which does 60 healing for one of your Stage 2 Pokemon. So if you're running a Stage 2 deck, like my Hydreigon, I could include a Lily there, right? To heal him up for 60 to make him extra tanky. When it comes to healing, there's a couple things you want to check out. For these big heals like Lily or Erica, which heals 50 from any grass Pokemon, you're kind of hoping that after this big heal, you can live 2 hits from something. So again, looking at Suicune, swinging for 120 a turn, so 240 over 2 turns. You're hoping that your card will be able to have over 240 health if you include that healing. And so Hydreigon, with 150 plus 60 from Lily, only gets to 210. And so it will never live 2 hits from a Suicune. So I'm not going to include Lily. But if you had something with more health than Hydreigon that could get over that 240 threshold, that might be a time to include it. Other healing options include Pokemon Center Lady, which heals you for 30 and cures any status conditions. This is great because you can use it on any Pokemon, and getting rid of the status conditions can be massively important, especially if there's a lot of poison running around. Another option is Indeedee EX, which always heals your active Pokemon for 20 every turn. I think this was a very strong card in the last expansion, but got immediately power crept by Lucky Ice Pop. Lucky Ice Pop is just stupid. It's so strong. heals 20 damage, and you flip a coin, and if it's a heads, you get this card back, and you can just keep playing it. Lucky Ice Pop is more used for just healing up chip damage to make sure one of two things happens. Either your health stays over an important threshold, again, referring to how the damage in the meta looks right now, or it is healing you up to full health so that you can retreat and not be hit by a Cyrus. And if you're looking at my deck, you might see how Lucky Ice Pop would fit perfectly in. Hydreigon is going to do 30 damage to itself every turn. And so its 150 hit points is really good, right? Because that means you can live a hit from other Hydreigon, you can live a hit from Suicune, you can live a hit from Mega Altaria, because they're doing 130 or 120 damage a turn. And it has 150 health. But you use its ability, it knocks itself down to 120, meaning it can get knocked out by any of those 3 Pokemon next turn. So, a single Lucky Ice Pop, even if you flip tails, takes you from 120 to 140, meaning you are living those hits from all 3 of those big meta threats. And if you flip a heads, you can do it again next turn. It also runs an EX Pokemon, or a Mega EX Pokemon, even. And we do not want this thing to get Cyrused up because it's worth 3 points if it dies. On games where we start Mega Absol in the active spot and it just takes a little chip from opponent's baby Pokemon or basic Pokemon, we want to Lucky Ice Pop it back to full before we retreat it into a Hydreigon so that later we can't be hit by Cyrus. Because of that, Lucky Ice Pop is definitely worth including in this deck, and that's going to round out my deck. I also wanted to hit on one other really important card that you could include here, and that would be Guzma. Supporter card, let me pull it up here, but it's going to discard any supporter cards, or any tool cards, excuse me, that your opponent has. So it's going to get rid of those poison barbs, it's going to get rid of those giant capes, things like that from your opponent. This card is pretty underlooked right now and has a lot of value in my opinion. And the last thing here to consider is if you made any cuts on Cyrus or Sabrina, or if you have not as many draw cards here, this would be a good spot to add those in. So I could have put a Sabrina in instead of one of these Lucky Ice Pops, because I only added a Cyrus. That would have been a fine inclusion in this deck, and that would have been a very powerful card to add as well. Lucky Ice Pop is just so strong here that I felt like I needed 2 of it. But a Sabrina would have been very reasonable here. And then I want you to do one final check when you're looking at your deck here. I want you to count how many supporter cards you have. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's on the low end of the acceptable range, but that's okay. You want probably no less than 4 and no more than 8 in an average deck. If you are above 8, I'm going to seriously have you consider removing a couple of those supporter cards, get to 7, 6 maybe even, and replacing them with similar tool cards if possible. So again, Sabrina could become Repel, things of that nature. Your Lycias could become Pokeballs, just things that do a similar function that are not supporter cards. Because what's going to happen when you have too many supporter cards in your deck is your hand is going to get clogged with these supporter cards, and you can only play 1 per turn. Really, you want to be finding 1, maybe 2 at most every turn, so that you're just able to play 1 every turn and not have too many dead cards in your hand, but you're still able to get the exceptionally powerful supporter card off most turns. Like I said, these final couple of flex cards are the hardest cards to add to the deck because they can be so many different things. And I often find myself staring at a deck with like 22 cards in it that I want. And it's just so frustrating because all of these cards would make my deck better, but I only have room for 20. And so I just want to go back and we can look at ways you could cut down cards from your deck. You are not going to touch these. These are going to stay here. When you're looking at your Pokemon, are there any Pokemon that aren't absolutely required for what you are trying to do? Looking at me, I need the Dinos, I need the Hydreigons, I need the Mega Absol. Absol and Nihilego are questionably important. They do nice things. They allow me to hit the bench and combo well with Cyrus in the case of Absol. And in the case of Nihilego, they increase my poison barb damage to make sure my Hydreigon's hitting some big key numbers as far as getting one-hit KOs go, like we discussed earlier. If I wanted to, I could cut out an Absol here. It's not essential. And so that would be one card I could cut. Going on, we need our rare candy. We need our poison barb, so make sure we're hitting for enough damage to one-hit KO Hydreigons and Suicunes. So those are both very important. Cyrus, I'm never going to go to 0 Cyruses. I think that's a must-keep. The copycats, absolutely essential. And the Lucky Ice Pops and Flex, I think are really good here. So I'm going to keep them. But you could always make cuts to your Flex cards, your Draw Power cards, or your board control cards. I think in this deck, the most cuttable card would be this Absol. So if I wanted to, I could drop the Absol, and let's get that Sabrina back. Let's say I really did want that Sabrina. We could include it there. And so that would change up our deck a bit. That would make us only have 4 basic Pokemon, and it would go up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 supporters. Those are all fine numbers and not bad spots to be in. It's just an important thing to consider. To recap, here's what the average deck construction is going to look like. 4 required cards here, 2 Professor's Research, and 2 either Pokeball or Lycia, something to help you find your basic Pokemon. Then you're going to have your Pokemon. Again, right now, we're seeing between 4 and 10 Pokemon on most of the major competitive decks, so an average of 7. After I cut that Absol out of my deck, I have 6 here, but the average might be 7. Then you're going to have cards that are required to play those Pokemon. Things like Rare Candy, like Poison Barb, like any orders that are specific to your Pokemon. I would say on average you might have 2 of those. This deck has 4, so it's a little over average here. Then you're going to have Cyrus and Sabrina, your ways to affect your opponent's board. I think on average here, you're going to have 2. The most common is 1 copy of Cyrus, 1 copy of Sabrina. Then you're going to have extra draw support. Again, 2 is pretty typical, and Copycat is the most powerful in most scenarios. And at that point, you are going to have about 3. I only have 1 because I had extra cards here, but about 3 spots for your flex cards. This can be ways to disrupt your opponent's hand. This can be damage modifiers. This can be things that improve your survivability. This could be any of the previous categories, so extra draw support, extra way to influence their board. Another Pokemon you might want for consistency or to give you some extra utility. But flex spots are really the difficult spot where you can put anything the deck might need, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions on the flex spots. However, if you want more flex spots, you can consider playing a different kind of deck, right? Where the average is 4 to 10 Pokemon in a deck. If you play a deck with 4 Pokemon, that's going to free up a lot of extra flex spots. You're going to be able to play a bunch of extra cards here that you might not have been able to play if you had 10 Pokemon. For example, the most common one is Darkrai and Giratina. They usually run 4, sometimes 5 Pokemon, and those Pokemon don't even need anything special to play with them. They're basic Pokemon. You know, Pokeballs find them. They're really tanky naturally. They're really powerful. Like, you don't have any rare candy requirement. You don't have any poison barb. You don't have any specific supporter card that you have to use. And so they have a massive amount of flex space here. With only 4 Pokemon, that is 3 under the average. And with no required cards, that's another 2 under the average. So they're going to come into the flex spot with an additional 5 flex spots compared to an average deck. However, if you're playing something with 10 Pokemon, so maybe Mega Altaria, which always has to have a full bench, and if it evolves to stage 1 Pokemon, you are going to have a lot fewer flex spots. You are going to have 10 Pokemon here, which is 3 more than average, and suddenly that's all 3 of your flex spots gone. Now, maybe you don't need as many of these cards because Rare Candy isn't required, so maybe you do get 2 flex spots back there. But the point is, Pokemon have different level of neediness, essentially. Giratina Darkrai is exceptionally unneedy. It's low maintenance. You just need those 4 cards, and then you're ready to play. Whereas Mega Altaria is much more needy. You need 10 Pokemon. That's half your deck right there in Pokemon. You're not going to have as many flex spots, and so it's going to be harder to fit things in that aren't Pokemon to a Mega Altaria deck than to a Giratina and Darkrai deck. So always consider that when you're looking at the power level of a card, is how needy is this Pokemon? How many cards do I need to run for this Pokemon to work? And if it's higher, on the higher end, just know you're going to have fewer flex spots. You're not going to be able to run as many niche cards that would really be nice to have in the deck because it's just so needy compared to other cards out there. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was my first on the channel, and so it means a lot to me. Please let me know what I can do better next time, what I can improve upon, and what things you did like. I have a couple ideas for some more good informative videos that might help you out, so please make sure to subscribe so you catch those videos. Like I said, this is my very first one, so a like and subscription would really go a long way and help me out and keep me motivated to make more videos. Again, thank you so much for your attention and for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.